Rail transit that's grade separated is a big investment, but it really pays off when the land surrounding a station is absolutely ripe for redevelopment. You know what doesn't pay off though? Having half the station area ruined because there's a 12-lane freeway running right up against it. The successes and challenges of Seattle's Link Light Rail and what we can all learn from it coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer-suggested topics always welcome, and there's no viewer comment here, just the fact that because I was born and raised in Seattle, I do come back here a lot, and it is a very interesting place to observe many aspects of cities and transportation in their natural habitat. So in a previous episode, I'd boarded the Amtrak Cascades down in Portland. Well, 3.5 hours later, I stepped off the train at King Street Station on the south edge of downtown Seattle. And there really is a lot to talk about in downtown Seattle, and I will come back to that in a later episode. But what I really wanted to talk about this time was Link Light Rail, but not downtown. Instead, I really wanted to go deep into Seattle's north end to the last and newest stop on the line, the Northgate Link Station. If you're coming from downtown, every station is underground until you get to Northgate, where the train emerges from a tunnel around Northeast 95th Street and climbs to an elevated alignment terminating at the station. So it's fully grade separated, which is great for operations, but it does mean that from street level, you have to climb to a mezzanine where the ticket machines are if you didn't have the foresight or wherewithal to just buy one on your phone. And then you have to climb to the station platform. And that's always a trade-off with grade separated transit. There's just going to be a bit more access time getting to the actual train, which isn't a big deal, except from all reports, Sound Transit seems to be having a lot of trouble keeping their escalators operational. And unfortunately, can confirm, I kind of got used to this with the pedestrian bridge escalators in Vegas last year, but those are fully exposed to the elements and I guess to like 115 there. So I don't know what Seattle's excuse is. I am going to come back and talk more about the link service and the station itself, but let's get into some of the adjacent land use. The first notable thing about this elevated station is it has just a breathtaking view of Interstate 5. Now, if you watch this channel with any regularity, you know I'm not a fan of freeway adjacent transit. And I don't want to harp on it here too much because what's done is done and we just kind of have to make the best of it, but let's just recap for the sake of completeness. First of all, it's the vehicular traffic. I'm going to get to this later, but for decades, this site had a very large shopping mall on it with an ungodly amount of surface parking. There are some other factors here too, but the upshot is I-5 here at Northgate Way has a pretty high capacity, pretty complex interchange. Just for the northbound direction alone, you've got an on-ramp at Northgate Way itself. You've got an on-ramp and an off-ramp for the I-5 main line at Northeast 107th Street. And you've got a combined northbound off-ramp / southbound on-ramp for the reversible express lanes at 103rd Street. The result is a ton of capacity for moving vehicular traffic into and around the station area, which I don't know is really the vibe you want around a high capacity transit node, let alone the noise, the pollution, and the crash exposure. Traffic's just the beginning though. The I-5 right-of-way is around 500 feet wide at this point, and it's taking up some of the most valuable catchment area for this station. Catchment area that's really just steps from where you get the train. So that's bad, but I don't even know if that's the worst of it. For all of the other land that's in the highest value radius of the transit station, you're gonna be building right up against a 12-lane freeway. I just want to be crystal clear about what the research says about health outcomes for people who live next to a freeway and are consistently exposed to massive quantities of the tailpipe emissions and fine particulate matter that come from tires and brakes. You can do your own research, I guess, but the American Lung Association says if you live within about a quarter mile of a freeway, you're at significantly increased risk of asthma, impaired lung function, cardiovascular disease, and dementia. And it's not as if I don't understand why freeway adjacent transit gets built. The right-of-way is always a lot cheaper. You avoid all the neighborhood opposition. There are logical reasons why we keep doing this over and over, but the fact that we keep doing it doesn't make it a good idea. It's almost as if cities need policies explicitly prohibiting the planning of freeway running rail transit just to keep decision makers from following the path of least resistance every time. Either build high-capacity transit away from freeways or just get rid of the freeways. Sorry, I just had to get that rant out of the way. Let's talk about bus connections, which are extremely important here because this is now a major transfer point. But first, let's acknowledge that there has been a transit center here for a long time, since 1992, I believe, and it basically got decommissioned when the Link station opened last year. But the whole thing with all the sawtooth bus bays is still around. It's just a layover station now. So the bus bays have all been relocated and they surround the base of the Link station now. And there's all kinds of buses here. Tall boys, regular boys, bendy boys. And Seattle can be a little confusing because instead of a single regional transit agency, you do have a few different agencies operating, but the connections to the Link station are about as convenient as they can possibly be. Okay, let's talk about the state of transit-oriented development in the area around the station that's actually developable, because transit-oriented development and leveraging this huge investment in rail is really the whole game here. And I want to be fair about this because the area is clearly not what it should be yet, but this is a good place to talk about one of my pet peeves, the park and ride. And look, I get it. Northgate is the last station on the line, and I'm not totally opposed to having park and rides at the very last station. But keep in mind, Northgate's days as the northern terminus of Line 1 are numbered, so the park and rides that exist here are mildly well used today, but there's still way too much of it, especially considering that, thankfully, parking isn't free. And I think at least one of these structures is a bit of a white elephant from when Northgate Mall was still operating, but this is like 8 a.m. on a weekday morning and it is desolate. Okay, what I want to talk about now is what the actual plan for the Northgate station area is, because clearly it's nowhere near built out. First of all, recognize that Northgate is a designated regional growth center in the Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050, which means that at a regional level, we want to direct growth where we have the greatest co-location of dense housing, employment opportunities, services, and mobility options. That means we have to have strong station area planning, and for that, the City of Seattle worked on zoning and an urban design framework that would really help guide the kind of development the region needs around the station area. So what we're really talking about here is transit-oriented development. When you're doing station area planning, this is a little broad and categorical, but you usually consider the area within a quarter mile extremely high value for transit accessibility. A half mile is somewhat high value. A mile out gets more marginal, and further than that, you're just catching people biking, connecting via transit, or driving to the park and ride. Now, remember that the region is settled on a light metro system, at least north of downtown, that has very limited stops. I mean, spaced 1 to 2 miles apart. So the upside of this is it's built for speed. There are only 4 stops between Northgate and downtown Seattle, so it's a 16-minute ride. And to say that's competitive with driving, considering Seattle traffic, is the understatement of the year. The downside of 1 to 2 mile stop spacing is access. There are limited locations where you're going to be within the quarter-mile catchment area of a Link station, so it's all the more important to have the best walking and biking connectivity you possibly can, with as much density as you can possibly get in those limited locations. And we've already established that the region has kind of shot itself in the foot by running adjacent to I-5 here, but they did make a sizable investment in the John Lewis Memorial Bike and Pedestrian Bridge, which is really the bare minimum you can try to do to capture ridership from people who want to walk and bike from the other side of the freeway, since the nearest crossings otherwise are Northgate Way, about half a mile north of the station, and Northeast 92nd, about a half mile south. And it is an important connection because directly across I-5 from the Northgate Link station is North Seattle College. Full disclosure, as an undergraduate, my academic path was a little unorthodox, and I spent a couple of quarters at this aesthetically lovely institution getting my GPA right. So I do have a soft spot for this place, and I don't care what you all say, brutalism is back. Before we talk about the immediate station area, let's check in on the connectivity to adjacent neighborhoods, which is pretty important when your stations are 1 to 2 miles apart. I just want to point out that to get from the core station area to the established residential part of the Maple Leaf neighborhood, You have to cross 5th Avenue, which I wouldn't even call a strode. It's just one travel lane in each direction. But if the fact that there are both big buttons and crossing flags is any indication, this probably isn't the most comfortable pedestrian environment. And when you get into the residential streets, you're in one of these misbegotten parts of Seattle that was developed before the invention of sidewalks, I guess. Annexed into the city in kind of a quasi-rural condition, and then just left to fend for itself for decades without basic urban infrastructure. Not a situation unique to Seattle, but it does make for a challenging pedestrian environment. Don't worry though, they did put up some Vision Zero signs, so problem solved. More full disclosure, this is literally where I'm from. It's where I grew up. Northeast 92nd is the last street that has sidewalks. They just kind of disappear after that. So you could literally say, I grew up where the sidewalk ends. That's your poetry for today. Okay, in a minute I'm going to get to the very heart of this, which is what's happening in close proximity to the Link station, at least the part that isn't covered by a 12-lane freeway, including redevelopment of one of the great historic shopping malls of the 20th century. But first, quick reminder to drop a like on the video, hit the subscribe, and the bell, especially if you're enjoying this very location-specific city visit. I do have more cities on the docket, including Houston, Texas, in the very near future, so follow on the apps for bonus stuff, and consider supporting directly on Patreon if you want to help make this kind of content pencil out. Also, when I do these city visits, I'm generally open to doing meetups. Time's a little crunched for Houston, but I did do a group bike ride on Lake Washington Boulevard, which the city of Seattle closes to cars a few weekends every summer. And the bike ride was followed by sort of a reception at an adult beverage establishment. The turnout was kind of mind-blowing. I literally talked to people nonstop from 10:30 in the morning to like 5 p.m. And the thing I heard the most was, wow, this must be very exhausting for you, which is understandable since I am a confirmed introvert. But I have to tell you, spending time talking to people who kind of already decided they like you and who care about the same things you care about is sort of the opposite of exhausting. So huge thanks to The Urbanist, which really organized this whole thing. The Urbanist, if you don't know, is an online publication that tackles urbanist issues like climate, housing affordability, and people-centered streets by bringing together independent journalism, research, and advocacy. Like, some of the research I did for this very video came from the pages of The Urbanist because they report on important stuff that I care about that almost no other outlets cover to the same depth. All the work they do is sustained by contributions from readers, so if you find value in this kind of local entity, and I'm hoping you do, then definitely consider contributing. And all the better if you set it up as recurring, and this is literally me doing exactly that right now. Before we leave Lake Washington Boulevard, this is another one of those gorgeous waterfront streets that's only ever really useful to the people who can afford to live there or people who drive. Because when it's open to vehicle or traffic 350 odd days a year, it's pretty unusable for everyone else. There are discussions going on to reconfigure the street to make it better year-round for people walking, biking, and rolling. And if you want to get involved in that and make your voice heard, I'll leave some information down in the description. Trust me, planners read stuff, they're often on your side, and there is strength in numbers. Okay, let's head back north and get into the real meat of what's happening around the Northgate Link station. Note that there's some of the station that's kind of done already and has been for a while. This is Thornton Place, which started going up around 15 years ago, I think. A very cool thing here is the daylighting of Tanner Creek, which for decades was covered by a massive surface parking lot that was used for overflow mall parking during holiday season. So, in other words, basically empty about 364 days a year. And maybe more information than you needed to know, but that huge empty parking lot is where I learned to drive a car. That's right, I do in fact have a driver's license. Okay, so we've been avoiding the elephant in the room, or maybe more accurately, the white elephant, which is the redevelopment of Northgate Mall itself. When it opened in 1950, it was an open-air mall, something we hadn't really seen before, and was really a harbinger of auto-oriented land uses to come. I believe it was Southdale Mall in the Twin Cities area that was really the first fully enclosed mall when it opened in 1956. And Northgate wasn't fully enclosed until 1973, but it was a trendsetter. There's not much left of that version of Northgate, which really endured until 2019 when all the anchor department stores started shuttering. Really, there's just the original north entrance, which is kind of a depressing vestige of what the mall used to be. Enter shopping center redevelopment mega corporation Simon. The charitable interpretation here is the whole thing is being reimagined as a more community-oriented place, still with shopping, but with a healthier, more dynamic mix of uses that doesn't depend on people showing up to just engage in a frenzy of consumerism. The area they're calling Central Park, not to be confused with Central Park, is basically done, but a lot of the housing and businesses that you would want to activate the park just don't exist yet. So a lot of the redevelopment just isn't online yet, and I do come back to Maple Leaf just about every time I'm in Seattle, so I'll keep tabs on progress, but one thing that is complete is the Kraken Community Iceplex, which is the practice facility for Seattle's new National Hockey League team. Believe me, I was really straining to find a creative way to insert a release the Kraken joke in here somewhere, but it's just not my style. The Iceplex is an example of how the city is working with private entities to really diversify and catalyze the former mall site though, because it's not just an NHL practice and training facility, it really is a community center. There are 3 full-size NHL rinks, and they have public skate and skate rentals for all ages, youth and adult rec leagues, and even themed skates and other rink-appropriate events. Pumpkin curling, anyone? So it really is designed to be an inclusive and welcoming venue. But the primary order of business is to facilitate the continued ascent of the Kraken to the top of the NHL's Pacific Division. And if you get lucky, you might just walk in when practice is happening. There were hundreds of people in the stands when I walked in, and it was just super cool to hang out in an intimate setting and watch these incredibly skilled athletes just honing their craft. This kind of goes back to a recurring theme on this channel, which is why I think sports franchises are pretty integral to a city. People, not everybody, but a lot of people, feel a strong identification with these elite athletes and with a team that represent their city in battle with other cities. What else? Yeah, you can watch practice while you're having a coffee and working on your laptop. You can watch practice if it's a lunch or dinner time. And there's a team shop, of course. You can even get mascot plushes, which I don't think I really want to elaborate on. I mean, I don't even have the vocabulary to describe what's going on here. So here's my takeaway. The Northgate Link Station is challenged. Too much catchment area either covered by I-5 or rendered unlivable because of proximity to a noisy, toxin-spewing freeway. Too much space dedicated to parking. Not enough of the intended development far enough along yet, although it is happening. And yet, it is busy. Northgate Station now has the most boardings of any station on the system, and Link broke ridership records, pre-pandemic ridership records, this summer. Thanks, Swifties. The trains were crowded every time I rode them, and it's gonna get a lot busier when we get the Linwood extension and the full East Link online. But this system already needs to run more trains like yesterday. There really wasn't anything I saw on this trip that contradicts what I found in my video on the fastest improving US cities, which put Seattle at number 1. And being the most improved US city when it comes to curbing car dependency is maybe a bit of a low bar, but one thing you can say about Seattle is when it comes to urbanism, people absolutely show up. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to the patrons, one of whom really got the ball rolling on this whole meetup event. You know who you are. And of course, thanks to the folks at the Urbanist who did all the heavy lifting to organize the group bike ride on Lake Washington Boulevard and the meetup at Machine House in Columbia City. It was super fun, and as always, keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new installment next week, and I'll see you then.